Marxism and Socialism with Chinese Characteristics by Jin Huming. Chapter 1 Marxism and its great significance in the contemporary world. Since its birth about 1.5 centuries ago, Marxism has scored glorious achievements in its combination with labor movements and socialist revolutions and construction. It leaves deep imprint on world history in the 20th century and is bound to have a greater impact on human history in the 21st century. It can be said that the profound influence of Marxism on human history is unparalleled by any other theory or doctrine. In March 1983, more than 1,000 people participated in the grand meeting held in China to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the death of Marx. The author delivered a speech entitled The Great Change Made by Marx in the Conception of History, which begins as follows. The depth and breadth of the influence of an ideology on history is proportional to the truth it implies. As time goes by, many prominent theories have lost their past brilliance, but Marxism keeps advancing with the times. The truth it embodies has gained even greater vitality and power. During the 100 years that Marx has been sleeping in Highgate Cemetery, Marxism has spread from Europe to the United States and to the whole world, with the force of a majestic thunderbolt. Today, we still want to use these words to express our belief in Marxism and our reverence to Marx, the man of the millennium. At present, although the world socialist movement is at a low ebb, we firmly believe that Marxism is still full of infinite vitality, and that the cause of socialism in the world will usher a new revival. Marxism can be summarized as scientific truth that reveals the essence and development law of the objective world, the ideological weapon of the working class and the laboring people to transform their world and world outlook and methodology to guide the liberation of mankind and the realization of communism. Marxism is a scientific system composed of a series of fundamental principles and basic points of view, including its founder's thoughts on Marxism, as well as the principles of his successors in answers to these issues of the times that have been tested and proven correct in practice. Marxism is a coherent scientific system as well as a developing theory. A fundamental characteristic of Marxism is that the system is an organic whole, is scientific, revolutionary, ideological, and true. Therefore, Marxism is destined to have an arduous journey in the course of development. It can only advance and struggle and open up a new road for itself in debating with all sorts of erroneous ideological trends and in addressing various questions of the times. Section 1.1 The emergence of Marxism brought about a great transformation of human thought. Section 1.1.1 The emergence of Marxism is a response to the rise of a modern workers' movement. As a new mode of production, capitalism has developed gradually from a feudal economic structure and social relations. It first originated in Italy in the 14th and 15th centuries. According to Engels, the first capitalist nation was Italy. The close of the feudal Middle Ages and opening of the modern capitalist era are marked by a colossal figure, an Italian, Dante, both the last poet of the Middle Ages and the first poet of the modern times. In the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century, with the development of a capitalist economy, some capitalist countries have complemented the political revolution and then carried out an industrial revolution. At the same time, the inherent contradiction of capitalist society, that is, the contradiction between capitalists and wage workers, increasingly intensified. Just as Engels pointed out, from its origin, the bourgeoisie was saddled with its antithesis. Capitalists cannot exist without wage workers. The development of capitalism and advent of modern industrial machine age, the proletariat, especially industrial workers, continue to grow, and the bourgeoisie produce their own gravediggers. The intensification of the inherent contradiction of capitalism and the economic crisis will inevitably result in the sharpening of class contradictions between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, which will swiftly become the principal societal contradiction. Three large-scale labor movements that occurred successively in France, the UK, and Germany in the 1830s and 40s marked the beginning of a new historical epoch of proletariat opposition to the rule of the bourgeoisie. The first labor movement refers to the two uprisings staged by silk workers of Lyon in 1831 and 1834 for better working conditions and pay. The workers shouted revolutionary slogans and proposed political demands that would allow them to defend the right of association and establish democratic republic. Engels said this showed that the proletariat no longer only fought against their enemies, but strode onto the historical stage as socialist soldiers. The second labor movement refers to British Chartism, which existed for about 12 years from 1936 to 1848. London workers published the People's Charter with aim to win the right to vote and set up their own organization, the National Charter Association. Petitions signed by millions of working people were presented at the House of Commons. Lenin called the movement the world's first extensive political revolutionary movement of the proletariat. The third labor movement refers to the Weber Revolt in Silesia, Germany, in June 1944. The dominant ideology of the revolt, namely explicitly opposition to private ownership and the exploitation system of capitalism, profoundly reflected the nature of the proletariat's struggle. It marked the awakening of the German proletariat with its distinctive theory and consciousness. Where should the newly rising proletariat movement go? What theories and strategies must be employed to arm the proletariat fighters so that their liberation can move forward along the right track? These are the serious historical tasks posed by the times. The existing theories related to the fate of the early proletarians, especially the Utopian socialism theory, were unable to answer the historical questions. Marx and Engels answered the call of the times with their theory and ideology, as the era and social practice called for revolutionary theory and the appearance of giants of the time. The profound historical background of the birth of Marxism also determined its distinctive class nature. Section 1.1.2 Marxism is a direct continuation of mankind's excellent ideological achievements. The development of the human spirit is a wealth of ideological materials for generating Marxism. All valuable ideological achievements in human history originated in Marxist theory. Lenin concluded that Marxism had three main theoretical sources: British classical political economics, German classical philosophy, and the Utopian socialism of Britain and France. He said, quote, "The genius of Marx lies in his answer to the various questions raised by the advanced ideas of mankind. The birth of his theory is a direct continuation of the theorists of the greatest representative figures in philosophy, political economics, and socialist ideology." We will elaborate on this point on the following aspect. Section 1.1.2.1 British Classical Political Economics. British classical political economics was created by William Petty, 1623 to 1687. During the British bourgeois revolution in the second half of the 17th century, and was accomplished at the beginning of the 19th century after the Industrial Revolution with Adam Smith, who lived from 1723 to 1790, and David Ricardo, who lived from 1772 to 1823, as his major representatives. Since Ricardo created the British classical political economics and was its last outstanding representative, Lenin called his work excellent fruit created by mankind in the 19th century. The main theoretical achievements of British classical political economics are as follows. Classical economists developed a labor theory of value and stated that labor, therefore, is the real measure of exchangeable value of all commodities. Their suppositions in the characteristics and origins of surplus value, and their economic analysis of class relations in capitalist society. Marx wrote in his letter to Joseph Wiedemeyer, Now, as for myself, I do not claim to have discovered either the existence of classes in modern society or the struggle between them. Long before me, bourgeois historians had described the historical development of this struggle between classes, as had bourgeois economists and their economic anatomy. Adam Smith divided the capitalist society into three major classes: landlord, capitalist, and worker, according to their income sources. David Ricardo studied the contradictions of the interests of three classes. Marx wrote that Ricardo exposes and describes the economic contradiction between the classes. Marx said his work had a scientific merit, a high evaluation of the theoretical value of the British classical political economics. Section 1.1.2.2 German Classical Philosophy. German classical philosophy can be traced back to the second half of the 19th century and reached its peak in the first half of the 18th century with Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who lived from 1770 to 1831, and Ludwig Andreas Feuerbach, who lived from 1804 to 1872 as his representatives. If British classical economics enhanced the understanding of society with its economic theory, then German classical philosophy enriched the philosophical thinking of mankind. Despite the fact that Hegel was an idealist, he was a master of dialectics, who expounded with his objective idealism the basic laws of dialectics: law of unity of opposites, mutual change law of quality, and the law of negation. Marx and Engels had both spoken highly of Hegel's great contributions to dialectics. Marx wrote in an afterword to the second German edition of Das Kapital, quote, "The mystification that dialectics suffers in Hegel's hands by no means prevents him from being the first to present this general form of working in a comprehensive and conscious manner." End quote. Engels also pointed out that, quote, "In Hegel's system, and herein in its great merit, for the first time the whole world, natural, historical, and intellectual, was presented in process, as constant in motion, change and transformation and development. He made an attempt to trace out the internal connection that makes a continuous whole of all movement and development." Moreover, Hegel also tried to describe the law of historical development. As Engels pointed out, Hegel has a strong sense of history. Another famous representative of German classical philosophy is Ludwig Feuerbach, an outstanding materialist philosopher and fighting atheist, who established a materialist philosophy characterized by humanism in his struggle against religion and idealism. Feuerbach takes nature and human life as the supreme objects of philosophy, emphasizing the objectivity of nature. He believes that nature is the non-concurrent eternal entity, the primary entity, the perceptual existence that can be directly perceived with the senses. Human beings are not pure self-consciousness. They are the unity of subject and object, body and soul. Body is the basis of spirit. Without body, especially the brain, an organic part of the body, there is no room for mind and spirit. From the perspective of unity of humans and nature, he clarified the point of materialism, with which he criticized Hegel's idealist philosophy that turned thinking into an independent spiritual entity. He also criticized theology and said that God is nothing but the alienation of human nature. Although with the features of metaphysics and intuition and with idealism in the view of history, Feuerbach's materialism broke through the dominance of Hegel's idealism and restored the authority of materialism, like a gust of fresh wind blowing into the boring German ideology circle, and making possible the reform of Hegel's idealistic dialectics on the base of materialism. Section 1.1.2.3 The Three Utopian Socialist Theories of France and England. British classical economics and German classical philosophy were both trying to reflect the desire and requirements of the capitalist class to develop capitalism. The utopian socialist theories, however, exposed and criticized the capitalist system instead of praising and safeguarding it. Utopian socialism, which came into being and developed along with capitalism, has a history of about 500 years, dating from the publication of St. Thomas More's Utopia in England in 1516, followed by Tommaso Campanella's The City of the Sun in Italy, Thomas Munzer's Millennium Kingdom in Germany, and The Law of Freedom in a Platform by Gerard Winsley, one founder of the English group known as the True Levelers or Diggers. Utopian socialism was still in its infancy at that time, and it was, in the words of Engels, quote, a gleaming communist ideology, end quote. By the 18th century, utopian socialist theory had undergone major changes with the appearance of works theoretically demonstrating socialist ideals, such as, you'll have to excuse me, this is just a Chinese character, I can't read Chinese, by John Misler, Grable Bernot, the Maybe Argumentative Works, and Franco Noel, Bibli Speeches and Essay. At this time, the utopian socialists broke through the literary form of utopia and began to discuss and prove its important socialist principles, such as elimination of the private ownership of the means of production. In Engels' words, the gleaming communist notions finally shed light on communist theory. At the beginning of the 19th century, the theory of utopian socialism developed to its highest stage and produced three great utopian socialists: Robert Owen of Great Britain and Comte Saint-Simon and Jean-Baptiste Joseph Fourier of France. They inherited the critical spirit of early utopian socialism and the result of the exploration of the ideal future society, making the theory of utopian socialism a more complete ideological system. Their major theoretical ideas can be summarized as follows. Dialectical elements in the view of history. Although still within the realm of 18th century French materialism, on the idealist view of the world, on the idealist view that the world is dominated by rationality, the utopian socialist view of history contains historical dialectics. Utopian socialists believe that human society is in a development process, in a series of stages of development. They believe each stage of development is not fixed, hence the capitalist society cannot be eternal. Fourier holds that the civilized system, referring to the capitalist system, is nothing but one stage of social development, and therefore should be suspected of its necessity of superiority and permanence. Second point, ruthless exposure and criticism of capitalist society maladies. Comte de Saint-Simon declared the capitalist system a new form of slavery, a topsy-turvy world, and attacked fiercely the egoism in the capitalist system. Fourier made a profound critique of capitalist private ownership, calling capitalist society based on private ownership the resurrection of slavery in social hell. He said that such a society moves in a vicious circle, that is, moving in the contradictions it constantly creates and cannot overcome. Owen called the private ownership, religion, and marriage of the capitalist society the trinity of evil, with private ownership as the culprit, the root cause of countless crimes committed by people and numerous disasters suffered by mankind in both past and present. Private ownership turns man into a monster and the world to hell. Theoretically, it is not justified, and in practice, it is equally unreasonable. They called for the abolition of capitalist private ownership, which can be considered the most bitter criticism of the capitalist system by the utopian socialists. Third point, concept of a future society. Utopian socialists believe that a future society that replaces the existing capitalist society should be an industrial and harmonious society. Owen advocated the establishment of communist labor communities based on public ownership. Property is owned by the public, production materials by the community, and living materials by individuals. There will be no difference between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, to each according to one's needs, and countries must be abolished. Many utopian socialist ideas are mere fantasy. The problems they raised and the valuable ideas they put forward, however, provided very important ideological material for the creation of scientific socialism. Engels once pointed out that they belonged to the most significant heads of all time, and whose genius anticipated numerous things, the correctness of which can now be proved in a scientific way, including ideas on a future ideal society and its defining characteristics, for which Marx and Engels provided a materialistic foundation. While talking about the influence of Hegel's philosophy on scientific socialism, Engels said that without German philosophy, particularly that of Hegel, German scientific socialism, the only scientific socialism extant, would never have come into existence. From these discussions, it is obvious that Marxism, as a scientific truth, was not produced in a vacuum. It is the result of the development of thought and culture in the past few hundred years. Without these advanced ideas, the creation of Marxism would be impossible. It is also the reason Marxism is a scientific truth able to withstand heavy battering. Section 1.1.3 Great Discoveries in Natural Sciences. Human understanding of society is constantly deepening, and even more so of understanding natural phenomena. In the first half of the 19th century, when significant achievements had been made in politics, economics, philosophy, and the theory of socialism, natural sciences, facilitated by the Industrial Revolution, had also achieved major breakthroughs, especially the discovery of the law of energy conservation and transformation, the theory of biological cell structure, and Darwin's theory of evolution, known as the 19th century's three major scientific discoveries in natural sciences. These marked the new height of human understanding of nature, that is, to reveal the laws governing the objective and dialectical movement of nature as a whole. Section 1.1.3.1 Discovery of biological cell structure. European scientists discovered and started to study animal and plant cells through a microscope as early as the 17th century. Matthias Jacob Schaldenheim, a professor of botany at the University of Jena, developed the first systematic cell theory in 1838. He stated that the different parts of the plant organism are composed of cells, and that the process of plant development is a process of cell formation and growth. Theodor Schwann, a professor of anatomy at the University of Liège, extended cell theory from botany to animal science in 1839. He pointed out that not just plants of various types are composed of cells, animal organisms with more complex appearances are also made up of cells, and both follow the same law to come into being and develop. Engels highly evaluated the significant scientific value of the birth of cell theory. Quote, "This discovery for the first time gave a firm basis to the investigation of the organic living products of nature, both comparative anatomy and physiology and embryology. The origin, growth, and structure of organisms were deprived of their mysterious character. The hitherto incomprehensible miracle was merged in a process which takes place according to a law that is essentially identical for all multicellular organisms." End quote. Cell theory reveals the dialectical laws governing the constant movement, development, and transformation of the biological world. Section 1.1.3.2 Law of Energy of Conservation and Transformation. The basic idea of the law of energy conservation and transformation was put forward by René Descartes from the perspective of philosophy as early as the 17th century. In 1644, he wrote in Principles of Philosophy that there is a fixed amount of energy in material movement, which can neither increase nor decrease, although it is sometimes increased or decreased in some parts of the material. Since the end of the 18th century, a series of discoveries made the mechanics, physics, and chemistry have proved the transformation between different forms of motion, providing favorable conditions for the establishment of the law of conservation and transformation. In the 1840s, the law of energy of conservation and transformation was proposed by several scientists at almost the same time. The mechanical equivalence principle was first stated in its modern form by German surgeon Julius Robert von Meyer in 1842. He found that his patients' blood was deeper red when they were consuming less oxygen, and therefore less energy to maintain their body temperature in hotter climates. Thus, he drew the conclusion that mechanical energy, heat energy, and chemical energy are equivalent and can be transferred into each other. In 1843, James Prescott Joule independently discovered the mechanical equivalent in a series of experiments, building the law the basis of the science. Meanwhile, several scientists in England, Germany, and Denmark drew the same conclusions in independent and different studies. The discovery of the law of energy, conservation, and transformation not only proved the unity of matter and the diversity of movement in nature with scientific facts, it also demonstrated that different forms of energy can be transformed into each other under certain conditions. The unity of all motion in nature is no longer a philosophical assertion, but a natural scientific fact. That is to say, what the law reveals is a dialectical law, governing but a constant movement, development, and mutual transformation of various material forms in nature. Section 1.1.3.3 Darwin's Theory of Evolution. Charles Darwin developed the theory of evolution through field investigation, making a more scientific demonstration of the origin of the species. In 1831, the 22-year-old Darwin boarded the warship HMS Beagle and began a voyage around the world that lasted nearly 5 years. Prior to the voyage, Darwin was a creationist who believed that matter was constant. On-the-spot geological investigation turned him to a disciple of Charles Lyell's geological grading theory. The surface of the earth is ever-changing rather than stationary. His belief that species are changeable was reinforced by research with the large amount of materials he had gathered from South America and the Pacific Islands. First, when he found that the huge fossils of prehistoric mammals in South America were very similar to smaller-sized modern animals, he realized the link between ancient and modern animals. Second, the geographical distribution of some closely related species in South America demonstrated a trend of successive substitution from north to south, with the species at the two ends completely different. This phenomenon reminded him of the successive substitution of different species and the production of new species. Third, while most creatures in the Galapagos Islands have the biological features of South American species, the species on each island have unique characteristics. He was convinced that there must be an internal connection between the differences of the species and their different living environments. With these facts, Darwin concluded that species on the earth are the outcome of evolution. After he returned to England in 1936, he continued his research using the huge collection of materials and finally developed a systematic theory of evolution. In 1859, he published Origin of the Species, full name, Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. With rich evidence, the work proves how species gradually evolved into new species in the struggle for existence and through the choice of nature, hence establishing the theory of evolution with natural choice as the core. The publication of his great work strongly supports the theory of dialectical development, and it gave a heavy blow to the idealist teleology and the metaphysical theory of the immutability of species. It was partly due to the rapid development of natural science that Hegel became a master of dialectics. Marx and Engels gave special attention to and researched in person the new achievements made in natural sciences. Marx wrote, quote, Math Notes, and Engels wrote The Dialectic of Natures and Anti-Düring, the Encyclopedia of Marxism, a book in which he studies a large number of problems in natural sciences. In a speech at the graveside of Karl Marx, Engels wrote, quote, 2 such discoveries would be enough for one lifetime. Happy the man whom it is granted to make even one such discovery. But Marx investigated every single field, and he investigated many, none of them superficially. Marx regarded the discoveries in natural sciences also as a huge driving force of productivity and social progress. Quote, Science was for Marx a historically dynamic revolutionary force. However, great joy with which he welcomed the new discovery in some theoretical science whose practical application perhaps it was yet quite impossible to envisage, he experienced quite another kind of joy when the discovery involved immediate revolutionary changes in industry and in historical development in general. End quote. From the above analysis, we can see clearly that the development of human thought and scientific progress provided sufficient and necessary conditions for the certain creation of Marxism. It can be said that the first half of the 19th century, the time was ripe for a brand new scientific outlook on history and the world to reveal the mystery of human history. Marx had a genius mind, was remarkably talented, incredibly diligent, and expressed selfless dedication to the working class. Moreover, he resolutely abandoned his original class and chose to be a member of the proletariat, a hard choice that few people would make. On this point, it was said, quote, his real mission in life was to contribute in one way or another to the overthrow of capitalist society and of the state institutions that had brought it into being, and to contribute to the liberation of the modern proletariat, which he was the first to make everyone conscious of his position and his needs, and conscious of the conditions of his emancipation. Having finished the transformation from revolutionary democracy to communism, from idealism to materialism, and having critically inherited all valuable ideas and achievements created by its predecessors, the founders created Marxism and realized a great revolution in the history of human thought. Marxism is a great revolution in human thought. First, it is the first theory that really builds human understanding of the social and historical phenomena on foundation of materialism. It is true that a great number of achievements have been made over the time in studies of social historical phenomena, including some genius speculations. On the whole, however, the field of history has been dominated by idealism, which interprets the social and historical phenomena with God, human, or concept regarding some spiritual as the origin of social history. The founders of Marxism applied materialism to the field of social and historical research, analyzed and studied social phenomena with the viewpoint and method of dialectic materialism, hence taking off the mysterious veil that had covered human society for thousands of years. It revealed the nature of social phenomena and the secret of human history, and it discovered the laws governing the development of human society. Engels shared that Marx's discovery in social science was as important as Darwin's theory of evolution for biology and the law of energy of conversion for natural sciences. Lenin called Marx's historical materialism the greatest achievement in scientific thought and the synonym of social science. It is self-evident that there would be no social science without this viewpoint. These are the most succinct and accurate evaluations of the scientific value of historical materialism of Marxism. The second reason Marxism is regarded as a great revolution in human thought lies in the fact that it sets philosophy and social sciences free from studies of scholars and turns them into a spiritual weapon for the majority of the working class to understand and transform the world. Lenin said, quote, Marxist philosophy is a consummate philosophical materialism that has provided mankind, and especially the working class, with powerful instruments of knowledge, end quote. In the past, philosophy and knowledge of social sciences were either tools of the ruling class or the objects of study for scholars. But the founders of Marxism openly declared that their theories are for the working class and the majority of the people to be used as spiritual weapon to understand and transform the world. Armed with social sciences under the guidance of Marxism, the workers' movement has developed from an unconscious stage to a conscious stage. The working class is consciously devoted to the transformation of the world, the struggle for liberation of mankind, and the great cause of communism. Section 1.2. The development course and stages of Marxism will be continued in the next video.